The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed overhead as Kendra Johnson held her 3 sleeping daughters against her chest. Her dark skin glistened with sweat and tears as she watched her husband of 5 years stuff his belongings into a duffel bag. The smell of antiseptic couldn't mask the bitter taste of abandonment that filled the sterile room. 3 girls, Kendra. 3 girls. Marcus's voice cracked with frustration as he shoved his last shirt into the bag. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what this means for us? Kendra's arms tightened around baby Harmony, Hope, and Heaven. Each weighed barely 5 pounds, their tiny fingers curled like flower petals. They're our daughters, she whispered, her voice hoarse from labor. They're beautiful and healthy. They're a curse. Marcus slammed his fist against the window. My grandmother always said triplet girls bring nothing but hardship. The whole community is talking. Mrs. Patterson won't even look at me at church anymore. The door opened and Dr. Williams entered with a clipboard. His face was grim as he approached the bed. Mrs. Johnson, we need to discuss payment arrangements. Your insurance has denied coverage for the extended stay, and the bill is now at $47,000. Marcus grabbed his bag. That's her problem now. I'm done. He didn't even glance at his daughters as he walked toward the door. Marcus, please? Kendra called out, but he was already gone. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step taking him further from the family he was abandoning. Dr. Williams cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Johnson, without payment arrangements, we'll need you and the babies to vacate by tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, but the hospital has policies. Kendra stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 3 tiny lives depending on her. Outside the window, she could see people walking freely on the street, going about their normal lives while hers crumbled. Her mother hadn't even visited. Her sisters had stopped answering her calls after hearing about the triplets. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, more to herself than to anyone else. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. There are some social services that might help. I can have someone speak with you. As night fell, Kendra sat alone in the dim room, nursing her daughters one by one. Each time she looked at their perfect little faces, her heart broke and mended simultaneously. They were innocent, pure, and already unwanted by the world. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chin, the night nurse, entered with a gentle smile. How are you holding up, honey? I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, Kendra admitted, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Chin sat on the edge of the bed. One day at a time. These little girls are lucky to have you as their mother. The community doesn't think so. They think I'm cursed. 3 girls, they say it's bad luck. People fear what they don't understand, Mrs. Chin said softly. But love always finds a way. You'll see. As the night wore on, Kendra made a promise to her sleeping daughters. I'll find a way to take care of you. I don't know how, but I will. You deserve everything good in this world, and somehow, I'll give it to you. The morning sun crept through the hospital blinds, marking the beginning of the hardest journey of her life. But as she looked at Harmony, Hope, and Heaven sleeping peacefully in her arms, she felt a strength she didn't know existed. She was all they had, and they were all she needed. The sound of breakfast carts rattling down the hallway reminded her that her time was up. Soon she would have to face the world as a single mother of triplets, with no money, no support, and nowhere to go. But she would face it with her head held high, because these 3 little girls deserved a mother who believed in miracles. 3 months had passed since that horrible night in the hospital, and Kendra felt like she was drowning in quicksand. The small efficiency apartment she managed to rent was barely bigger than a closet, with peeling paint and a broken heater that made the babies cry from the cold. She sat on the threadbare couch at 2 a.m., bouncing Heaven on her knee while Harmony and Hope cried in their makeshift cribs. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, and her back ached from working 3 different jobs just to scrape together enough money for formula and diapers. During the day she cleaned office buildings. In the evenings she worked at a fast food restaurant. On weekends she took in laundry for neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman next door, watched the babies during her day shift, but Kendra could see the strain on the old woman's face. Please, babies, please stop crying, Kendra whispered, her voice breaking. She had exactly $17 in her purse, and the rent was due in 2 days. The eviction notice on her door reminded her daily that she was failing as a mother. The doorbell rang and Kendra's heart sank. Through the peephole, she saw Mr. Patterson, her landlord, standing with his arms crossed. She opened the door with Heaven still in her arms. Miss Johnson, we need to talk, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I know the rent is late, Mr. Patterson, but I get paid tomorrow. I can give you half then and the rest by Friday. He shook his head. That's what you said last month. I have other tenants complaining about the crying babies. This arrangement isn't working. Kendra felt the familiar sting of tears. Please, I have nowhere else to go. Just give me one more week. I'm sorry, but I've already found new tenants. You have until Sunday to be out. He turned and walked away without another word. Kendra closed the door and slid down against it, still holding Heaven. The baby had finally stopped crying and was looking up at her with bright, curious eyes. Despite everything, her daughters were thriving. They smiled now, cooed at her voice, and reached for her fingers with their tiny hands. What am I going to do? She whispered to Heaven, who responded with a happy gurgle. The next morning, Kendra loaded the triplets into the second-hand stroller she'd bought and headed to her cleaning job at Thompson Industries. The massive glass building towered above her, filled with successful people in expensive suits who probably spent more on lunch than she made in a week. Mrs. Garcia, the cleaning supervisor, met her at the service entrance. Kendra, you know you can't bring the babies to work. I know, Mrs. Garcia, but Mrs. Rodriguez is sick today, and I couldn't find anyone else to watch them. Please, I'll work twice as fast. They'll be good, I promise. Mrs. Garcia sighed and looked at the 3 babies bundled in their stroller. One time only. Keep them quiet and stay on the floors where no executives work. Kendra pushed the stroller through the empty hallways, cleaning windows and mopping floors while the babies slept. She worked on the executive floor, thinking it would be empty since it was so early. The offices were beautiful, with mahogany desks and leather chairs that cost more than her entire apartment. As she cleaned the conference room, Hope started to fuss. Then Harmony joined in. Within minutes, all 3 babies were crying at the top of their lungs. Kendra tried desperately to quiet them, but they were hungry and tired. What's going on here? Kendra spun around to see a tall man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway. He was probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples. Her face burned with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get them out of here right now. But instead of anger, she saw something else in his expression. Curiosity. Concern. 3 babies? He asked, stepping closer. Triplets, Kendra said, gathering her cleaning supplies. I'm really sorry. This won't happen again. Wait, he said gently. What are their names? Kendra hesitated. Harmony, Hope, and Heaven. A smile crossed his face. Beautiful names for beautiful babies. He knelt down next to the stroller and the baby stopped crying, staring at him with wide eyes. They seem to like you, Kendra said, surprised. I have that effect on people sometimes, he said with a chuckle. I'm Jonathan Thompson. And you are? Kendra Johnson. I clean your building. Jonathan stood up and really looked at her for the first time. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the worn clothes, the way she held herself like someone carrying the weight of the world. These are your daughters? Yes, sir. Where's their father? The question hit like a punch to the stomach. He left when they were born. Said 3 girls were too much trouble. Jonathan's jaw tightened. What kind of man abandons his children? The kind that listens to superstitions more than his heart, Kendra said quietly. As she pushed the stroller toward the door, Jonathan called out, Kendra? She turned back. You're doing an incredible job. Those babies are lucky to have you. It was the first kind word she'd heard in months and it nearly broke her. Thank you, sir. As the elevator doors closed, Kendra didn't notice Jonathan Thompson watching her go with an expression of deep thought on his face. She had no idea that this chance encounter would change everything. The following week, Kendra arrived at Thompson Industries with dark circles under her eyes and a heavy heart. She'd been sleeping in her car with the babies for 3 days, using the gym at the community center to shower and change. Every muscle in her body ached, and she felt like she was living in a nightmare. She managed to find temporary childcare with a teenager in the neighborhood who charged less than professional services. But even that small expense meant choosing between formula and gas for her car. As she cleaned the executive conference room where she'd met Mr. Thompson, she tried not to think about how kind he'd been to her daughters. Rich people were different from her. They lived in a world where problems could be solved with money, where babies were planned and wanted, where families stayed together. Working late again? Kendra looked up from wiping down the massive table to see Jonathan Thompson standing in the doorway. He was still in his suit, but his tie was loosened and he looked tired. Yes, sir. I'm almost finished. He walked into the room and sat down in one of the leather chairs. How are the babies? They're fine, thank you for asking. Jonathan watched her work, noting the careful way she cleaned everything twice, the pride she took in her job despite her circumstances. Kendra, can you sit down for a minute? She stopped cleaning and looked at him nervously. Am I in trouble, sir? Not at all. Please sit. Reluctantly, she sat on the edge of a chair across from him. I've been thinking about you and your daughters all week, he said. I asked Mrs. Garcia about your situation. Kendra's stomach dropped. She had no right to discuss my personal business. She's worried about you. We all are. We. The staff. Everyone can see you're struggling, but you never complain, never ask for help. You just work harder than anyone else. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. I don't need pity, Mr. Thompson. It's not pity, Kendra. It's respect. Do you know how rare it is to find someone with your integrity and work ethic? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm just trying to take care of my girls. Where are you living now? The question she'd been dreading. We're staying with friends, she lied. Jonathan studied her face and knew she wasn't telling the truth. Kendra, I have a proposition for you. Her heart raced. In her experience, propositions from wealthy men usually came with strings attached. I need a live-in caregiver for my home, he continued. Someone to help with daily maintenance, someone trustworthy and hardworking. The position comes with a private cottage on my estate, full benefits and a salary of $5,000 a month. Kendra's mouth fell open. $5,000. Plus room and board. Your daughters would be welcome, of course. There's plenty of space for them to play and grow. Why are you offering this to me? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Because I believe in second chances. Because those babies deserve stability. Because you remind me that there's still good in this world. I don't understand. You don't have to understand. You just have to say yes. Kendra thought about sleeping in her car, about the empty feeling in her stomach, about her daughter's cries when she had no formula to give them. What would you want in return? Just what I said. Help with the house, someone I can trust. Nothing more. I can't accept charity, Mr. Thompson. It's not charity. It's a job. You'd work for every penny. She looked down at her hands, calloused from scrubbing floors and washing dishes. What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough for your world? Kendra, you're already better than most people I know. You've kept 3 babies alive and healthy while working multiple jobs with no help. If that's not good enough, I don't know what is. The offer felt too good to be true, but as she looked around the expensive conference room and then thought about her babies sleeping in a cold car, she knew she had to take the chance. When would you need me to start? Jonathan smiled and she noticed how it completely transformed his face. How about right now? I can have someone get your things and move you in tonight. Just like that. Just like that. But first, let's go get those beautiful daughters of yours. I want to see them again. As they walked toward the elevator, Kendra felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe Mrs. Chen had been right. Maybe love did find a way. Mr. Thompson? Jonathan. Please call me Jonathan. Thank you. For seeing us as more than just problems to be solved. Thank you for letting me help. You have no idea how much I need this too. The elevator doors opened, and as they stepped inside, Kendra felt like she was entering a new chapter of her life. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time since her daughters were born, she wasn't facing them alone. The ride to Jonathan's estate took 45 minutes through winding country roads lined with ancient oak trees. Kendra sat in the passenger seat of his luxury car, still clutching the diaper bag like a lifeline while the triplets slept peacefully in their car seats he'd somehow produced within minutes. I keep these in my office building's family room, he'd explained when she'd stared in amazement at the brand new car seats. You'd be surprised how many executives need them for unexpected visits with grandchildren. Now, as they pulled through iron gates and up a circular driveway, Kendra's mouth fell open. The house was enormous, a beautiful colonial style with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. Warm light spilled from dozens of windows, making it look like something from a magazine. This is where you live? She whispered. Too big for one person, isn't it? Jonathan said with a slight sadness in his voice. It was built for a large family. As they parked, a woman in her 50s came out to meet them. She had silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple dress and apron. This is Elena, my housekeeper, Jonathan said as they got out. Elena, this is Kendra and her daughters. Elena's face lit up when she saw the babies. Oh my goodness, they're beautiful. Come inside. I've already prepared the cottage for you. The cottage turned out to be a charming 2-bedroom house behind the main mansion, complete with a full kitchen, living room and everything they could possibly need. But what took Kendra's breath away was the nursery Elena had set up in the 2nd bedroom. 3 matching cribs stood side by side, each with soft bedding and mobile toys hanging overhead. A changing station was stocked with diapers, wipes, and everything else babies needed. The walls were painted soft yellow with hand-painted flowers along the borders. When did you do all this? Kendra asked, tears in her eyes. I called ahead, Jonathan said simply. Elena works miracles. I have granddaughters, Elena added. I know what babies need. As they settled the triplets into their new cribs, all three babies cooed happily, reaching for the colorful mobiles. It was the first time in months that Kendra had seen them so content. They love it, she said, watching Harmony grab at a stuffed elephant. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his expression soft. They deserve this. Every child deserves to feel safe and wanted. After Elena left to prepare dinner, Jonathan showed Kendra around the cottage. The refrigerator was fully stocked, the pantry filled with groceries. Clean towels hung in the bathroom and the closets were empty, waiting for their belongings. What belongings? Kendra laughed bitterly. Everything I own fits in 2 garbage bags. Then we'll get you what you need, Jonathan said. Tomorrow, Elena can take you shopping for clothes, furniture, whatever you want. I can't let you spend more money on us. Kendra, this is an investment. I need someone I can trust, someone who understands the value of hard work. In return, I'm providing you with security and stability. It's a fair trade. They sat on the couch in the living room, and Kendra finally asked the question that had been bothering her. Why are you really doing this? Nobody is this kind to strangers. Jonathan was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at his empty mansion. I lost my wife and unborn son in a car accident 5 years ago. This house has been empty ever since. When I saw you with your daughters, fighting so hard to keep them safe and loved, I remembered what it felt like to believe in family again. I'm sorry for your loss. Sarah would have loved your daughters. She always wanted children. His voice was thick with emotion. Maybe this is her way of making sure they have what they need. The babies started crying from the nursery, and both Kendra and Jonathan instinctively moved toward the sound. They bumped into each other in the doorway and laughed. Sorry, Kendra said, but Jonathan was already picking up Hope while she tended to Heaven and Harmony. She's so tiny, he marveled, holding Hope with surprising confidence. How much do they weigh now? About 12 pounds each. The doctor says they're growing perfectly. Of course they are. Look at how well you've taken care of them. As they fed and changed the babies together, Kendra felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since Marcus left, she wasn't alone in caring for her daughters. Someone else was there, helping, genuinely caring about their well-being. Jonathan. Yes. Thank you. For everything. I promise I'll work hard, I'll earn my keep. I know you will. But right now just focus on being a mother. Let someone else worry about everything else for a while. That night, after the babies were asleep and Jonathan had returned to the main house, Kendra lay in a real bed with clean sheets and a warm comforter. She could hear her daughters breathing softly in the next room, safe and fed and loved. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. She had no idea that in the main house, Jonathan was lying awake too, feeling more hopeful than he had since his wife died. Outside their windows, the stars shone down on a man who had found purpose again and a woman who had found sanctuary. And in the nursery, 3 little girls slept peacefully, surrounded by more love than they had ever known. The morning sun streamed through the cottage windows as Kendra woke up naturally for the first time in months. The babies were still sleeping, their soft breathing creating a peaceful rhythm she'd missed while living in the car. She stretched in the comfortable bed, hardly believing this wasn't just a dream. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She wrapped a robe around herself and found Elena standing outside with a breakfast tray. Good morning, dear. I thought you might be hungry. The babies too when they wake up. The tray held fresh fruit, warm pastries, coffee, and 3 bottles of formula at the perfect temperature. Elena, you didn't have to do this. Nonsense. You're family now. Elena's smile was genuine and warm. Jonathan is in meetings all morning, but he asked me to take you into town for shopping when you're ready. After breakfast and feeding the triplets, Kendra found herself in Elena's car driving toward the town center. The babies were secured in new car seats that had mysteriously appeared overnight, along with a double stroller that could accommodate all 3. He thinks of everything, doesn't he? Kendra said, running her hand over the stroller's smooth handles. Jonathan has a good heart. He's been lost since Sarah died, but yesterday was the first time I've seen him smile in years. The shopping trip was overwhelming. Elena took her to stores Kendra had only seen from the outside, places where a single outfit cost more than she used to make in a week. But Elena was patient, helping her pick out professional clothes for her work around the house, casual clothes for daily wear, and beautiful dresses just because every woman needs to feel pretty sometimes. I can't let him spend this much money, Kendra protested as Elena added another outfit to the growing pile. Honey, Jonathan Thompson could buy this entire store without thinking twice. Let him take care of you. You've been taking care of everyone else for so long. In the baby section, Elena went wild. Clothes in every size the triplets would need for the next year, toys, books, and everything else growing babies required. They're going to outgrow these so quickly, Kendra said, holding up a tiny dress. Then we'll buy new ones. These girls are going to have everything they need and more. When they returned to the estate, Jonathan was waiting in the main house living room. He looked up from his laptop as they entered, his face lighting up when he saw the babies. How was the shopping trip? Elena tried to buy out the entire town, Kendra said, but she was smiling. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. How are my girls? He approached the stroller and all three babies immediately began cooing and reaching for him. Your girls? Kendra raised an eyebrow. Jonathan looked embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to overstep. I just feel protective of them already. It's okay. They seem to adore you. As if to prove her point, Hope started fussing until Jonathan picked her up. She immediately settled against his shoulder with a contented sigh. She knows a sucker when she sees one, Elena said with a laugh. That afternoon, Jonathan gave Kendra a tour of the main house, explaining her duties. But he seemed more interested in carrying one of the babies than discussing work responsibilities. The main thing is just keeping an eye on things, he said, switching heaven from one arm to the other. Elena handles most of the housework, but I travel sometimes, and it would be nice to have someone trustworthy here. What kind of business are you in? Kendra asked as they walked through his impressive home office. Real estate development and investments. My father started the company and I've been expanding it. He pointed to photos on the wall showing various construction projects. We build affordable housing communities mostly. I believe everyone deserves a decent place to live. Kendra thought about her horrible apartment and sleeping in her car. That's important work. Sarah always said business should be about helping people, not just making money. As evening fell, they found themselves on the back patio while the babies had tummy time on blankets spread across the grass. The mansion's backyard was huge with a swimming pool, gardens, and plenty of space for children to play. They're going to love growing up here, Kendra said, watching Harmony try to grab a butterfly that landed near her blanket. I hope so. This house was meant for children's laughter. Tell me about Sarah, Kendra said gently. Jonathan's expression grew soft. She was a teacher. Elementary school. She loved children so much, always talking about the family we'd have someday. His voice caught. She was 6 months pregnant when the accident happened. What would she think about us being here? She'd probably scold me for taking so long to fill this house with the sound of babies crying, he said with a sad smile. She always believed things happened for a reason. That night, as Kendra put the triplets to bed in their beautiful nursery, she whispered to them about their new life. You're safe now, my babies. You have someone who wants to protect you, who sees how special you are. Through the window, she could see lights on in the main house where Jonathan was probably working late. She thought about how easily he'd held her daughters, how naturally he'd fallen into helping with their care. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe some people were just meant to take care of others. And maybe, after all the pain and struggle, they had finally found where they belonged. As she settled into bed, Kendra allowed herself to imagine a future where her daughters grew up happy and secure, where they never had to worry about being unwanted or unloved. It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. 2 weeks into their new life, a routine had developed that felt surprisingly natural. Jonathan would stop by the cottage every morning before work, drinking coffee with Kendra while the babies had their breakfast bottles. He'd started bringing his laptop, working at her kitchen table while she fed and changed the triplets. You don't have to babysit us, Kendra said one morning as Jonathan bounced Harmony on his knee while reading emails. I'm not babysitting. I'm spending time with my favorite people, he replied without looking up from his screen. Besides, this is the most productive I've been in years. Something about their happy sounds helps me think. It was true. The babies had transformed from the constantly crying infants of their difficult early months into happy, curious little girls who smiled at everything and everyone. They'd gained weight, their skin was healthy and glowing, and they slept through the night in their comfortable cribs. The pediatrician said they're perfect at their checkup yesterday, Kendra told him. All three are exactly where they should be developmentally. Of course they are. Look at their mother. The compliment made her blush. Kendra had changed too over the past 2 weeks. With proper rest and nutrition, her natural beauty had emerged. Her skin glowed, her smile came easily, and there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. "I have a conference in Chicago this weekend," Jonathan said, shifting Heaven to his other arm. 3 days. "Will you be okay here alone?" "Of course. That's what you're paying me for." But something in her expression must have given away her nervousness, because Jonathan studied her face carefully. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'll be fine." "Kendra." She sighed. "I've never been alone with them for more than a day since they were born. When I was working all those jobs, someone else was always helping, even if it was just for a few hours. So come with me." "What?" "Come to Chicago. The conference is boring anyway. You and the girls could see the city, stay in a nice hotel. Consider it a working vacation." "I couldn't impose like that." "You wouldn't be imposing. I'd enjoy the company." The trip to Chicago was an adventure none of them would forget. Jonathan had booked a suite at a luxury hotel with a full kitchen and separate bedrooms. While he attended his conference sessions, Kendra and the babies explored the city. Elena had insisted on coming along to help, and the older woman proved invaluable as they navigated museums, parks, and shops with 3 strollers. "This is the life those babies deserve," Elena said as they sat in Millennium Park watching the fountains while the triplets napped. "Travel, culture, opportunity. It feels too good to be true," Kendra admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "What? Because good things don't happen to people like you?" The question stung because it was exactly what Kendra had been thinking. "I'm not used to this world, Elena. I'm used to struggling, fighting for everything. Maybe it's time to get used to something better." That evening, Jonathan returned from his conference to find Kendra in the hotel suite's kitchen, making dinner while the babies played on blankets nearby. The sight of domestic happiness hit him like a physical force. "How was your day?" she asked, not noticing his expression. "Boring meetings about property acquisitions." "How was yours?" "We went to the Children's Museum. Harmony loved the water play area, Hope was fascinated by all the lights, and Heaven slept through most of it." She laughed. Elena took about 100 pictures. Jonathan sat on the floor next to the babies, and they immediately crawled toward him with excited squeals. In the 2 weeks since they'd moved in, he'd become completely devoted to them, learning their individual personalities and preferences. "Harmony always wants attention first," he noted as the baby pulled herself up against his leg. "Hope is the observer, always studying everything. And Heaven is the peacemaker, never cries unless her sisters are upset. You know them so well already. They're easy to love." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with more meaning than either was ready to acknowledge. Later that night, after the babies were asleep and Elena had retired to her adjoining room, Jonathan and Kendra sat on the suite's balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said. "Of course. What do you want for them?" "For their future?" Kendra thought carefully. "I want them to know they're loved and wanted. I want them to have opportunities one never had. Education, travel, the chance to become whatever they dream of being." "And for yourself?" "I haven't thought about myself in a long time. Maybe you should start." She looked at him curiously. "What about you? What do you want?" Jonathan stared out at the city lights. "I want to matter to someone again. I want to wake up excited about the day ahead. I want to build something meaningful with my life." "You already matter, Jonathan. To me, to the girls, to Elena. We all depend on you now." "It's not dependence I want, Kendra. It's family." The admission surprised them both. They sat in comfortable silence, watching planes blink across the night sky while 3 floors below them, 3 little girls slept peacefully, surrounded by more love and security than they had ever known. The months that followed their Chicago trip settled into a beautiful rhythm. Jonathan had started working from home more often, claiming he was more productive in the cottage's peaceful environment. The truth was, he couldn't bear to miss the milestones happening daily with the triplets. Harmony had taken her first steps, wobbling between the couch and Jonathan's outstretched arms. Hope had said her first word, "Mama," while Kendra was feeding her breakfast. And Heaven had learned to clap her hands, applauding everything from birds outside the window to her own reflection in the mirror. "They're growing so fast," Kendra said one autumn evening as they watched the girls play in the living room. At 10 months old, they were crawling everywhere, pulling themselves up on furniture and getting into everything. "Too fast," Jonathan agreed, capturing Hope before she could pull down a lamp. "I feel like I blink and they've learned something new." Elena had noticed the change in Jonathan too. He laughed more, smiled constantly, and had started talking about expanding the children's play areas around the property. The swimming pool now had safety gates, the gardens had been baby-proofed, and he'd had a playground installed behind the cottage. "He's becoming the father he always wanted to be," Elena told Kendra one afternoon while they watched Jonathan push all 3 babies on swings he'd insisted on installing. "He's not their father," Kendra said quietly, but her heart wasn't in the correction. "Isn't he? He feeds them, changes them, reads to them every night. He knows their schedules better than some biological fathers know their children." It was true. Jonathan had seamlessly integrated himself into every aspect of the girl's care. He'd learned to braid Harmony's hair, knew that Hope preferred her bottle slightly warmer than her sister's, and that Heaven needed her favorite stuffed elephant to sleep. That evening, after the babies were in bed, Jonathan appeared at the cottage door with a bottle of wine and a nervous expression. "Can we talk?" he asked. They sat on the porch swing he'd installed the month before, watching fireflies dance in the garden. Jonathan was unusually quiet, turning his wine glass in his hands without drinking. "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said. "About Sarah, about the accident." Kendra waited, sensing this was important. "We were coming home from the hospital. We just had the ultrasound where we found out we were having a son." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sarah was so excited, talking about names, about how we decorate the nursery. She had her hand on her belly, telling him about all the things we'd do together." "Jonathan, you don't have to. I need to say this. I've never told anyone the whole truth." He took a shaky breath. "A drunk driver ran a red light and hit us. Sarah died instantly, but the doctors managed to keep the baby alive for 3 hours. 3 hours where I had to decide whether to try experimental surgery that might save him or let him go peacefully." Kendra's heart broke for him. "What did you choose?" "I chose the surgery. I was so desperate to save some part of her, some part of our family. But he was too small, too damaged. I put him through pain for nothing." "You were trying to save your son. That's not nothing. For 5 years I've carried the guilt. The wondering if I made the right choice, if Sarah would have wanted me to let him go peacefully. I've been living in that house like a ghost, going through the motions of life without really living." Jonathan turned to face her fully. "But then I met you and the girls, and for the first time since the accident, I remembered what it felt like to have purpose. To protect someone, to love someone." "Jonathan, I know this is complicated. I know you've been hurt before, and I know the girls aren't mine biologically. But I love them, Kendra. I love all 3 of them like they were my own daughters." Kendra felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "They love you too. You should see how their faces light up when they hear your voice. And you? How do you feel about me?" The question she'd been avoiding for months hung between them. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how naturally they'd fallen into a family routine, how her heart raced when he smiled at her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The last man I trusted abandoned us when we needed him most. What if you change your mind? What if this is just some kind of phase for you?" Jonathan set down his wine glass and took her hands in his. "Kendra, look at me. I'm not going anywhere. Not tomorrow, not next month, not ever. You and those girls have given me back my life. But we're not your real family. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about love. I choose you. I choose them. Every day, I choose this life we're building together." The sincerity in his voice broke down the last of her defenses. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "I fell in love with you the day I met you," he said, pulling her closer. "Watching you fight so hard for your daughters, seeing your strength and courage. You're the most amazing woman I've ever known." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Kendra felt like the broken pieces of her heart had finally started healing. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we stop pretending this is just a job arrangement," Jonathan said with a smile. "Now we admit that we're a family in every way that matters." From the baby monitor on the table, they could hear Heaven making soft sleeping sounds, and both of them smiled. "She's dreaming," Kendra said. "Probably about all the trouble she and her sisters are going to get into tomorrow." As they sat together on the swing, Kendra realized that for the first time in her life, she felt completely safe and loved. The man beside her had chosen her and her daughters not out of obligation or pity, but out of genuine love. And in the nursery, 3 little girls slept peacefully, unaware that their world had just become even more secure and filled with love. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Kendra took the girls to their pediatrician appointment in town. As she maneuvered the triple stroller through the clinic's parking lot, she noticed heads turning and whispers following her. Inside the waiting room, the atmosphere grew noticeably tense. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband was Kendra's former landlord, sat across from them with her young grandson. "Well, well," Mrs. Patterson said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look who's living the high life now." Kendra kept her attention focused on the babies, but her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Must be nice," Mrs. Patterson continued, "finding a rich man to take care of your mistakes." "Excuse me?" Kendra finally looked up. 3 babies you couldn't afford, abandoned by their father because he had sense. Now you're shacked up with some white billionaire playing house. The waiting room had gone completely silent. Other patients stared openly, some nodding in agreement with Mrs. Patterson's harsh words. "My daughters are not mistakes," Kendra said firmly, standing up. "And my personal life is none of your business. It becomes our business when you're making decent black women look bad. Chasing after white men with money instead of building with your own people." Dr. Chin appeared from the back office, sensing the tension. "Johnson family? We're ready for you." As Kendra pushed the stroller toward the examination rooms, she heard Mrs. Patterson's final comment. "Those babies are going to grow up confused, not knowing where they belong." The appointment went well. All 3 girls were healthy and developing perfectly, but Kendra's mood remained dark. On the drive home, she called Jonathan. "How did it go?" he answered on the first ring. "The girls are fine, but there was an incident." "What kind of incident?" Kendra told him about the confrontation, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Jonathan said when she finished. "People can be cruel when they don't understand. Maybe they have a point though. Maybe I am just taking the easy way out." "Kendra, stop. You're not taking anything that isn't freely given. You work hard, you're an amazing mother, and you deserve happiness." But the encounter had shaken her confidence. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, she found herself questioning everything. "Jonathan, do you ever think about what people say about us?" "What people?" "The interracial thing. The class difference. The fact that I came with 3 babies and no money." Jonathan set down his fork and reached for her hand. "I think about how lucky I am that you said yes to my offer. I think about how these girls have made my house a home. I think about how I've never been happier." Before Kendra could respond, Elena burst into the cottage without knocking, something she'd never done before. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a local news website with a headline that made Kendra's stomach drop. "Local billionaire's charity case. Thompson Industries CEO plays house with single mother of triplets." The article was cruel and invasive, describing Kendra as a welfare mother who struck gold, and speculating about the nature of her relationship with Jonathan. There were photos of them together at the pediatrician's office, at the grocery store, pushing the stroller through the park. "Who took these pictures?" Kendra asked, feeling violated. "It doesn't matter," Jonathan said, his jaw tight with anger. "What matters is that this stops now." "Maybe I should leave," Kendra said quietly. "Take the girls and go somewhere else. I don't want to ruin your reputation." "My reputation?" Jonathan stood up abruptly. "You think I care about what these small-minded people think of me? You should care. This could hurt your business." "Kendra, look at me." He knelt beside her chair. "I love you. I love harmony, hope, and heaven. Nothing else matters to me. But the community can accept us or not. It's their choice. But I'm not hiding our relationship anymore." The next morning brought more challenges. Jonathan's office called to say several clients had made comments about the news story. Some were supportive, but others had expressed concerns about doing business with someone they saw as unstable in his personal life. "Sir," his assistant said carefully, "perhaps a public statement clarifying the nature of your relationship might help." "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon," Jonathan replied. "And make sure the local news stations are all invited." "Jonathan, you don't have to do this," Kendra protested when he told her about the press conference. "Yes, I do. I'm not going to let anyone question your character or suggest that what we have isn't real." That afternoon, Jonathan stood in front of the Thompson Industries building with microphones thrust toward him and cameras rolling. Kendra watched from home with the babies, her heart pounding. "I've asked you here today to address some rumors and speculation about my personal life," Jonathan began. 6 months ago, I met an extraordinary woman named Kendra Johnson. She's a single mother of 3 beautiful daughters who had fallen on hard times through no fault of her own." The reporters scribbled notes furiously. "I offered her a job because I recognized her character, her work ethic, and her dedication to her children. Over time, that professional relationship became personal. I am proud to say that I love Kendra and her daughters deeply. Mr. Thompson," a reporter called out. "Are you planning to marry Miss Johnson?" Jonathan smiled and Kendra's breath caught. "I can't answer that question without spoiling a surprise. But I will say this. Kendra Johnson is the strongest, most loving woman I've ever met. Her daughters are bright, beautiful, and deserving of every opportunity in life. Anyone who has a problem with my family is welcome to take their business elsewhere." The last statement sent shockwaves through the watching crowd. Jonathan Thompson was essentially telling his critics that he chose love over money, family over business. When he returned home that evening, Kendra was waiting on the porch with the babies playing at her feet. "You could lose clients," she said as he approached. "Then I'll find new ones. Better ones. People who understand that love is more important than prejudice." "And if your business suffers?" Jonathan sat down beside her and pulled her close. "Then we'll build a new business. Together. But I'm not giving up my family for anything or anyone." As the sun set over their property, Kendra realized that Jonathan had just publicly declared his commitment to them in the strongest possible way. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And in the nursery, 3 little girls slept peacefully, protected by a love that was stronger than any criticism or judgment the world could throw at them. The triplets' first birthday approached like a beautiful storm of preparation and excitement. Jonathan had insisted on throwing them a party that would be absolutely perfect for absolutely perfect little girls. The estate was transformed into a wonderland of pink, purple, and gold decorations. A professional photographer was hired to capture every moment. Elena had spent weeks planning a menu that would accommodate both adults and the babies who were just learning to eat solid foods. "This is too much," Kendra protested as workers installed a bouncy castle in the backyard. "It's their first birthday," Jonathan replied, directing the placement of 3 matching high chairs. "It should be special. But who's even coming? We don't really have friends here yet." Jonathan's expression grew mysterious. "You might be surprised." The morning of the party, Kendra dressed the girls in matching white dresses with flower crowns that Elena had made by hand. They looked like tiny angels, babbling happily as they played with the ribbons on their outfits. "Mama pretty," Harmony said clearly, reaching up to touch Kendra's face. It was a new word for her and Kendra's heart melted. "You're pretty too, baby girl." Jonathan appeared in the nursery doorway wearing a navy suit and looking nervous. "Are my birthday girls ready for their party?" "Dada," Hope squealed, clapping her hands. The word stopped both adults in their tracks. Hope had been calling Jonathan Dada for weeks, but hearing it on their birthday felt especially significant. "Yes, sweetheart," Jonathan said softly, picking her up. "Dada's here." As guests began arriving, Kendra was amazed by the turnout. Dr. Chin came with his family, several neighbors she'd met at the grocery store, and even some of Jonathan's business associates who had children. But the biggest surprise was when a familiar car pulled up the driveway. "Is that?" Kendra started. "Mrs. Rodriguez." Elena called out. "You made it." Kendra's former neighbor from the apartment complex got out of the car with tears in her eyes. Behind her came 3 other women Kendra recognized from the neighborhood. "Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said, embracing Kendra tightly. "Look at you. Look at these beautiful babies. How did you know about the party?" "Your young man called me," she said, nodding toward Jonathan. "He wanted to make sure the people who cared about you before were here to celebrate with you now." Kendra looked across the yard to where Jonathan was setting up a sprinkler for the older children. He caught her eye and winked, and she felt her heart overflow with love. The party was magical. The babies smashed their individual birthday cakes with gleeful abandon while everyone laughed and took pictures. Harmony got frosting in her hair, Hope tried to feed cake to Jonathan, and heaven clapped for every single person who sang happy birthday. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, Jonathan approached Kendra with an unusual expression on his face. "Can I borrow you for a minute?" he asked. "Elena's watching the girls." He led her to the gazebo in the back garden, which had been decorated with fairy lights and white flowers. The setting was breathtakingly romantic. "Jonathan, what's all this?" Instead of answering, he took her hands and looked into her eyes. "Kendra, a year ago I was living in the shadow of grief, going through the motions of life without really living. Then you walked into my world with 3 crying babies and a determination that took my breath away. Jonathan, please let me finish." He smiled nervously. "You've given me everything I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, joy, laughter, love. You've made me a father when I thought that dream was dead. You've made my house a home." Kendra's heart began racing as Jonathan dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. "Kendra Johnson, will you marry me? Will you let me be not just the man who loves you, but the husband who promises to cherish you and the father who promises to protect and provide for harmony, hope, and heaven for the rest of my life." Through her tears, Kendra saw the most beautiful ring she'd ever imagined. But more than that, she saw a future full of love, security, and happiness for her daughters. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes. Of course yes." As Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from the direction of the house. Elena, Mrs. Rodriguez, and several other guests had been watching from the windows. "You planned this whole thing?" Kendra laughed, wiping away happy tears. "I wanted everyone who loves you to be here when you said yes." "Assuming you said yes. Did you really think I might say no?" "I hope not. But you've been hurt before. I wanted to make sure you knew how serious I am about this, about us, about forever." They kissed as the fairy lights twinkled around them and their guests applauded from the house. When they broke apart, they could hear the triplets squealing with laughter as Elena chased them around the living room. "Our daughters are going to have your name," Kendra said wonderingly. "Our daughters," Jonathan repeated, loving the sound of it. "Harmony, Hope, and Heaven Thompson. It has a nice ring to it." As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Kendra marveled at how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been sleeping in her car with 3 hungry babies, abandoned and alone. Now she was engaged to a man who loved her unconditionally and wanted to give her daughters the world. Elena met them at the door with the triplets, who were covered in frosting and absolutely exhausted from their big day. "Did she say yes?" Elena asked, though the answer was obvious from their glowing faces. "She said yes," Jonathan confirmed, lifting Hope into his arms. "We're getting married." "About time," Elena said with satisfaction. "These babies need their daddy to make it official." As they put the girls to bed that night, each one falling asleep the moment their heads hit their pillows, Kendra felt a peace she'd never experienced before. "Thank you," she said to Jonathan as they stood in the nursery doorway. "For what?" "For choosing us. For seeing us as worth loving. For giving my daughters the father they deserved." "Thank you for letting me love you all," he replied. "You saved me, Kendra. You brought me back to life." Outside their window, the stars shone down on a family that had found each other against all odds. And in their cribs, 3 little girls slept peacefully, surrounded by more love than they would ever be able to comprehend. Tomorrow would bring wedding planning and new adventures. But tonight they were simply a family, complete and perfectly happy. 6 months later, the estate was once again transformed, this time for a wedding that would be talked about for years to come. Jonathan had insisted on holding the ceremony in their garden, surrounded by the flowers and trees where they'd fallen in love. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows, with an aisle scattered with rose petals leading to an arch covered in cascading flowers. The same fairy lights from their engagement night twinkled in the trees, creating a magical atmosphere as the sun began to set. In the cottage, Kendra stood before a full-length mirror while Elena put the finishing touches on her hair. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, flowing silk that made her feel like a princess. The triplets, now walking confidently and chattering constantly, wore matching flower girl dresses and flower crowns. "Mama pretty," Harmony declared, clapping her hands. "Dada," Hope added, always eager to talk about Jonathan. "Cake," Heaven said hopefully, making everyone laugh. "Yes, sweetheart, there will be cake," Elena assured her. "Lots and lots of cake." A knock at the door interrupted their preparations. Mrs. Rodriguez entered with tears already in her eyes. "Mija, you look like an angel," she said, embracing Kendra carefully so as not to wrinkle the dress. "Thank you for being here. For everything. I wouldn't miss this for the world. You deserve this happiness." As the music began outside, signaling the start of the ceremony, Kendra felt a moment of overwhelming gratitude. The past year and a half had been like a fairy tale, but it was real. The man waiting for her at the altar was real. The love they shared was real. "Ready?" Elena asked, handing her the bouquet. "More than ready." The processional began with Elena walking down the aisle, followed by Mrs. Rodriguez carrying Heaven. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Harmony and Hope toddling down the aisle together, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy while guests laughed and took pictures. Finally, it was Kendra's turn. As she appeared at the top of the aisle, every guest stood and turned to look at her. But she only had eyes for Jonathan, who stood at the altar with tears streaming down his face. She had chosen to walk alone, feeling that this moment represented her choosing love for herself and her daughters. Each step down the aisle was a step toward the future they'd built together. When she reached the altar, Jonathan took her hands and whispered, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "And you're the most wonderful man I've ever known," she whispered back. The officiant, a family friend of Jonathan's, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and family. But the most powerful moment came when he addressed the adoption papers that would make Jonathan legally the girl's father. "Jonathan, do you promise to love, protect, and provide for Harmony, Hope, and Heaven as your own daughters?" "I do," Jonathan said firmly, looking at each girl in turn. "I promise to be the father they deserve, to support their dreams, and to love them unconditionally for the rest of my life." "And Kendra, do you take Jonathan to be your husband, trusting him with your heart and the hearts of your children?" "I do," she said without hesitation. "I trust him completely." When they exchanged rings, Heaven suddenly broke free from Mrs. Rodriguez and toddled over to Jonathan, raising her arms to be picked up. Without missing a beat, he lifted her while continuing his vows. "I promise to love you and cherish you and our daughters through every joy and every challenge life brings us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to build a life with you filled with laughter, love, and the sound of children playing," Kendra replied. "You may kiss your bride," the officiant announced. Their kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of promise. As they broke apart, Heaven clapped her hands, Harmony squealed, "Mama, Dada," and Hope tried to grab the bouquet. The reception was a celebration of everything good in life. There was dancing under the stars, toasts that brought tears and laughter, and a three-tiered cake that the triplets attacked with gusto during the cake cutting. Dr. Chin gave a speech about how rarely he'd seen a family so clearly meant to be together. Elena toasted, "the best boss who became the best husband and father." Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about watching a young mother's dreams come true. But the most touching moment came when Jonathan stood to speak. "A year and a half ago I thought my life was over. I was existing but not living, going through the motions but not feeling anything. Then Kendra walked into my world with 3 crying babies and changed everything." He looked at his new wife with such love that several guests wiped away tears. "She taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about commitment, about loving someone so completely that you can't imagine life without them. Harmony, Hope, and Heaven aren't just my stepdaughters, they're my daughters in every way that matters." The girls, who had been playing at his feet during the speech, all reached for him simultaneously. He picked up Heaven while Kendra gathered Harmony and Hope. "To my wife," he continued, "thank you for giving me back my life. Thank you for trusting me with your heart and the hearts of our daughters. I love you more than words can express." "To family," someone shouted from the crowd. "To family," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, the new family found themselves alone in the garden. The triplets were exhausted but fighting sleep, not wanting the magical day to end. "Was it everything you dreamed of?" Jonathan asked, wrapping his arms around Kendra from behind as they watched their daughters chase fireflies. "It was better," she said, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this much happiness was possible. And now I can't imagine life any other way." Harmony ran over and tugged on Jonathan's pants leg. "Dada up." He scooped her up, and she immediately laid her head on his shoulder with a contented sigh. "I think someone's ready for bed," Kendra said, gathering Hope and Heaven. As they walked toward the cottage, their home, Kendra marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that horrible night in the hospital when Marcus left to this perfect evening surrounded by love and family. The community that had once shunned her now celebrated her happiness. The babies who were once unwanted were now treasured. The man who had lost everything had found it all again. "Kendra Thompson," she said aloud, testing the sound of her new name. "I love the sound of that," Jonathan said, kissing the top of her head. In the nursery they changed 3 sleepy toddlers into pajamas and tucked them into their beds. Each girl got kisses from both Mama and Dada, and each one fell asleep with a smile on her face. "Mrs. Thompson," Jonathan said as they stood in the doorway watching their daughters sleep. "Mr. Thompson," she replied, taking his hand. "Ready for our honeymoon tomorrow?" They were taking a family honeymoon to Disney World, because Jonathan insisted that their first trip as a married couple should include all their children. "I can't wait to see their faces when they meet Mickey Mouse," Kendra said. "I can't wait to see yours." As they settled into bed in the master bedroom of the main house Kendra had moved in the week before the wedding, she reflected on the incredible transformation of their lives. "Do you think they'll remember this day?" she asked. "Maybe not the details, but they'll remember being loved. They'll remember being wanted. They'll remember that their father chose them. Their father who loves them so much he literally rebuilt his entire life around them. Their father who got 3 daughters and the love of his life all in one incredible package." Outside their window, the lights were still twinkling in the trees where they'd been married. The garden would return to normal tomorrow, but the magic of this day would last forever. "I love you, Jonathan Thompson," Kendra whispered in the darkness. "I love you too, Kendra Thompson. Forever and always." And in the nursery down the hall, 3 little girls slept peacefully in their beautiful beds, safe in the knowledge that they were loved, wanted, and cherished by 2 people who would move heaven and earth to give them the world. The fairy tale was complete, but the real story, the story of a family built on love, commitment, and the belief that everyone deserves happiness, was just beginning.